It's interesting that I get the concepts, but if you're in a startup mode, how do you peg yourself? Because you don't have enough, let's say you're year one or maybe year two, you may not have enough back data to work with. How do you factor in, let's say, a startup? Is there another added element that you kind of tap into, especially if it's like a new idea? If you think back to the first iPhone or the first BlackBerry, right? Before that was
Mhm.
Nokia, pretty solid, pretty simple, straightforward. Not your smartphone, but as smart as you're going to get, right? And then someone comes up with a BlackBerry. Yeah, how do you provide a valuation on something like that close to being proven is like the idea feels hot? You ask your neighbor, feels like it's a great idea, but now, how do you provide guidance in that? Like, especially if you're going somewhere else to, with that valuation for a reason, right? How do you provide more insight?
So stock markets and history have got great indicators for that. So if you remember in 1999, we had this e-commerce boom where oh, he likes that. Yeah, Dwayne. Yeah, you're right. We had valuations of 20 times revenue, forecast revenue in 3 years or something, right? For, I don't know, petfood.com or something, right? And really that comes down to a risk assessment, right? On how risky is this business? So one of the things that I look for is the difference between maybe what Berkshire Hathaway invests in versus what cryptocurrency guys invest in, right? Crypto guys, they're going to go, intangible assets, high risk, high return, and we'll just eat the risk, right? Whereas Berkshire Hathaway, they invest in railroads. So they're looking at the tangible asset base, right? The things that you can see and touch. And so this is another component that I probably should talk about with respect to valuation is understanding the components of value in a business. So when most people think about a business, I don't know, give me a business podcast. Okay. So there's your business. Yes. So your business is largely intangible assets, right? It's this technology, but it's also, your audience on your various streaming platforms. It's your networking group. It's your individual ability to do interviews effectively. It's your ability to communicate effectively, to find sponsors for your podcast, to gain the audience that you will have. But there are some tangible assets, right? There are the communication devices that we're using. You own those. That's the studio you've got. Those are your tangible assets. So when you look at your balance sheet that your accountant produces, the intangible assets never show up there. But for me, they exist because I can see them. And they exist because you can see them. CRA can't see them. They don't know that those exist because the accountants don't tell them that. But when you go to sell the business, then you're going to say, I'm going to sell the tangible stuff, the communications equipment, and maybe the studio lease, right? But then I'm going to sell all the other intangible stuff. So when I think about the value components in the business, I'm going to talk about the tangible assets, the things you see and touch. And then I'm going to talk about the identifiable intangible assets. And those would be, patents, processes, secret recipes, technologies, independent technologies. It might be a educated, dedicated workforce. These are things that you can attribute value to. And then there's goodwill, and that is the unidentifiable intangible asset, and it means everything else. So let's say the business is worth $100, right? That's the present value of future cash flow, and that's the value from a market perspective, la, la, la. Then we allocate, say, in the podcast world of business, we would allocate maybe $20 to the tangible assets, really, because, our technology, right, our cell phones and these things, like, they become obsolete in 2 years. So a very low number for the tangible assets. Then I would allocate, if you had a patent on this or you had a dedicated process to this, a trademark of some kind, then I would allocate a value to that, and then everything else goes into the goodwill bucket. Then there's, on top of that value stack of buckets, there is one more, and you guys will like this. This is net economic value added, and it comes from the willingness of a purchaser to pay more for a business than it's actually worth. Oh, he says. Okay, so if you identify that strategic interest purchaser, we can attribute value and figure out how much more they're going to pay for your business than it's actually worth. So if your business is worth, say, $100, and we've allocated 20 to the tangible assets and maybe 30 to the 20 to the tangible assets and 30 to the intangibles. So that gives us 50 and $50 for the goodwill. And then we might be able to extract another $10 or $20 from somebody who particularly wants this business. Now, why would they do that? They want to extend their geographic reach. They want to extend their customer reach. They want to improve their utilization rates. They want to increase their capacity. They're going to get G&A synergies. That's probably the biggest one and easiest to find, right? You don't need 2 CEOs. You don't need 2 CFOs. You don't need 2 accountants. You don't need 2 HR people. You can let those ones go. And that G&A savings then improves the larger company's profitability. Right? Take 2 guys, small guys, and put them together. So there's this thing on the top, net economic value added. You can quantify that value. And so when you go to sell the business, you'll actually get more than it's worth. But in general, that's what we want to talk about is the tangible assets, the intangible assets, identifiable, and then intangible assets, non-identifiable is goodwill.